Aimie Runyan, welcome back to the Rocky Mountain Writer Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark.
Absolutely. We are less than a week away from the launch of a brand new book.
Yes, the School for German Brides will be out Tuesday, April 26th. Counting down the minutes.
Congratulations. Book number.
Thank you. 6.
Awesome.
Yep.
Fantastic. Very cool. Well, we've had you on the podcast before. Folks who know that when we have you on, there's no shortage of stuff to talk about. You are so adept at talking about your books and your writing process, and you're very inspiring. You're a great teacher in classes at conferences and things like that. But so let's just dive in, and why don't you set up the new novel for us? Tell us what it's about.
Okay, so the School for German Brides, and I know you want to talk about Across the Winding River later, but it was actually inspired by Across the Winding River while I was doing research. And so that's always fun when a book like begets another book. It's great. And so I learned about these schools that the Nazis put together in the mid to early to mid 30s to help train women to be good German housewives. Because unlike, if you've read my previous book, Daughters of the Night Sky, where Russia was all about emancipation of women, at least on paper, and getting them to do factory jobs, this, that, and the other thing. In Germany, there was a huge emphasis on getting women back in the house. And so they created these schools so that women would go home and have lots of babies and be able to care for them and run an efficient household. And because Germany after World War I had an extremely high infant mortality rate. And so I know this is probably going to a lot of historical detail, but they had a really high infant mortality rate. So they created mother schools. And this was an offshoot of that, bride schools. And they were taught basically home economics, and also with a bit of charm school with a huge dash of Nazi propaganda. And I read about these schools and I thought it was absolutely horrifying. And I mentioned them briefly in Across the Winding River. One of the characters, the secondary characters, Meta, gets sent to one of these. And she was kind of the inspiration for this whole book. And so we have a young girl her mother passes away. And she's around 17 years old, final year of high school. And so her father sends her off to live with his brother and sister in Berlin, because he figures that would be a great place for her to finish off her education and make a good match. And it turns out that Uncle Otto and Tante Charlotte are very high up in the Nazi regime. And so they're pushing her into like the League of German Girls with the BDM, and eventually into one of these bride schools. And then you have the secondary storyline about a young woman who is half Jewish, half Aryan, whose father has abandoned them to save his own business, to save his own, reputation, because mixed marriages were not looked upon favorably. And so they're trying to make their way in the world. And Hannah, the German girl, and Tilda, the Jewish Aryan German girl, their paths cross at kind of the pivotal moment. And so it is largely a book about the role of women inside the machine of Nazi Germany.
And I assume it's also about the pros and cons of having the government run the school where they're trying to show the world how the world should operate.
Exactly. There was a huge emphasis on encouraging the women to raise their children in a way that was very pro-Hitler. And so, that was definitely some really sketchy things being taught. And this really came to light in like 2014. They did classify some of this information, and you can find pictures of what the school, and of course, the same with the BDM, there was a big emphasis on being physically fit and eating local foods, and, some things that, on paper, like, oh, that's logical. That's not necessarily bad, but then you throw in the eugenics side of things and it becomes very ugly.
Now, just quickly, BDM, I missed the reference. What does that stand for?
Bundesdeutscher Mädel, which is to translate, which is the League of German Girls.
Oh, gotcha.
So it is the girls' equivalent of Hitler Youth. And it's important to know that Hitler Youth and the BDM were the only two youth organizations allowed in Nazi Germany from the 30s onward until 1945. So you couldn't join the Boy Scouts. You probably couldn't even join a bowling league. I mean, it was very severe, because that was one of the most effective tools that Hitler and his goons had for indoctrinating the youth, and keeping more, getting more people invested in the cause, because you start them young. Yeah, and it's researching the youth movements is horrifying, absolutely horrifying.
How enlightened are your characters going into the story about the pros and cons of this whole system?
Well, Hannah, the girl who's orphaned, is so wrapped up in her own grief, and she's trying to fit in with her aunt and uncle. They're a childless couple, and her aunt Charlotte is a bit overbearing and trying to get her. And she knows that her aunt, at her core, honestly just thinks she's doing what's best for her niece, and trying to and that's what Hannah believes, is that her aunt is trying to do what's right. And in the beginning, she's not horribly, I mean, she knows that her mother, who's passed away, was not a huge fan of the regime, because her mother had been a doctor, and women starting in 1936 were no longer allowed to practice medicine other than midwifery. And the same with Jewish folks. And so she was, she had her doubts, but she was trying so desperately to be accepted by her aunt and uncle, because, I mean, her entire life in the course of a few weeks went topsy-turvy. So it's not like she had months and months, of dread leading up to moving in with her aunt and uncle. Her mother died, and then 2 weeks later, she's sent to live in Berlin. So she's going through so much that, and it's kind of a parable, because I read a great article about teenagers in Berlin, even fairly late in the war. And they were, they were typical, as you would imagine. And I was a high school teacher, so I can definitely understand this. The world really kind of ends at the edge of their nose. And they're so self-absorbed because they're figuring out their place in the world. I'm sure it serves a biological function. And, bless their hearts, they just, until it started affecting them personally, it was just, something that was going on. And Hannah, to a lesser degree, she's a bit more enlightened than that. But at the end of the day, she was a teenager in the beginning of the book. And it's, she has her doubts, but she's so wrapped up in herself that she doesn't stop to kind of be a bit more introspective and to pay attention to things until further along. And
this book is set where? You said Berlin?
It is set in Berlin.
Okay.
The whole thing is in Berlin. Mm-hmm.
And you know the exact place and location of this particular school, or did you get to dream that?
Yeah. No. Okay. So it is based on. So there were a whole series of these schools, but the most famous one was on Schwanenwerde Island on Lake Wannsee near Berlin. And the building still exists today, and it is across the street from the building where they made the final solution. They came up with the final solution in January of 1942 to exterminate all the Jews in the concentration camps. And so it is an area, and that building is now a museum, but the whole place is basically steeped in evil. And even more interesting is that a lot of those beautiful villas on that island were confiscated from Jewish people before the war. And during the war. And so it's definitely because this was my lockdown book. I wrote this while, from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. after spending a day homeschooling my kids as a newly single mother. I mean, I crammed in writing, instead of my 3,000 words a day sprint, it was 300 words a day here and there, cobbled together. And actually made for very easy editing because I felt such a distance from the manuscript. But it was, so I didn't get a chance to go there, but I have been to Berlin, and thank goodness for the internet and, Google Maps and that sort of thing. But, my then boyfriend, now husband, lived in Berlin for 2 years. And so he had a little bit of insight there, and he'd been to that area. So.
And if there hadn't been a pandemic, you would have probably hopped on a plane and gone back, but.
Absolutely. That would have been ideal. It would have been ideal.
Yeah. Aimie, how did you got this seed for the idea of the story? What does it take for you to flesh it out to the point where you know you can start writing? What list of things did you need in place in terms of characters and character arcs and just a goal for this book?
Yeah.
How do you know when to start writing?
I tend to start writing pretty early. I mean, this was one that, I mean, I knew it was such kind of a high concept thing. I mean, German bride schools. And just a disclaimer, most of the book doesn't take place in the bride school because, home ec on steroids. I mean, it just wasn't the most fascinating thing, but the whole thing is about the training of Hannah in particular. But I mean, I knew that the bride schools were such a compelling concept that, as soon as I came up with a character and her situation and what was going to get her involved in the bride school, that's when I was able to start writing. And, the fact that I had Hannah, I knew that she'd lost her mother and she was being sent away from the countryside to the city. And I knew that she was going to have a very rough transition into Berlin society, but she was beautiful. She was tall, blonde, blue-eyed, fair, and very much the typical Aryan, prized woman. And so, her aunt and uncle see her walking down off the train car platform, and they say, "We can get this girl a good match high up in the Nazi echelon." And so you're having that kind of almost like a Jane Austen type, let's get this girl married off type of instinct. That's where I was able to start. And I remember I was on a road trip when I first started sketching out longhand on a road trip, because Hannah really came to me. And, she was a very anxious person. And her mother, when she was a young girl, had given her a worry stone to rub. And so to rub when she was feeling anxious. And so that's a motif that keeps coming back, and her like sewing hidden pockets into her clothes. And I found a piece of rose quartz while I was camping and kept that with me while I was writing, just kind of as a talisman for her. And yeah, it just kind of all came along.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And so the connection, so Across the Winding River was the last book before this one, right?
Correct.
Okay. And will it be obvious to those who read the other one when they jump into this one that it's not really a sequel, it's just sort of a companion book?
It's more, there's no real relation. I mean, in some ways, this could be Meta's story. If you read Across the Winding River and you read Meta's character, because she's not on screen a lot, but her presence is felt throughout the entire book. She's a very important character, even though she's only in a handful of scenes. You could see this sort of being Meta's story if things had gone differently. And I did shift the timelines a little bit, so it couldn't be exactly her story.
Gotcha. Wow.
Yeah.
So what has Aimie learned? I mean, you just have come so far in the last half dozen years. When was your first book? When was your first book out?
Promise to the Crown came out in 2016, and Duty to the Crown came out 6 months later. Pardon me.
And you have just been on a pace of late.
Yes, it's I had 2 books in 2016, 2 in 2018. Then 2020, and now 2022. It seems like even number years are my lucky years. But actually, I've got 3 books coming out next year. So
what?
Yeah.
What? Let's slow down here. You have 3 books coming out next year.
I do. One of them is a co-authored project with 2 other authors, Rachel McMillan and Janelle Soselsky. We're writing an anthology. It's a collection of 3 novellas, all to do with the same crumbling down castle in the north of England, and that take place around 3 different wars: the Boer War, World War I, and World War II. And it's the same family and the same connection to the castle. And it's wonderful and spooky and gothic. And we had a great deal of fun writing that. And then I have another historical coming out, I hope in the spring. We're trying to firm up dates with William Morrow, the same publisher for the School for German Brides. And it's called A Bakery in Paris. And it's to do with three generations of women, not consecutive generations of women from the same family who own or have connection to this one small, tiny 2-story bakery in the outskirts of Paris. And it centers around the Paris Commune of 1870 and 1871 and the siege on Paris. And then the post-war era, right after World War II, and there was a lot of violence and things happening in Paris. And then a more modern day timeline, the 1990s. And so think of it basically as Les Mis meets Chocolat. And that was, I just finished drafting that, and it was brilliant fun to write. And then in the fall, I am branching into contemporary women's fiction, and I am writing a book that takes place in Provence, bit of magical realism, kind of book club women's fiction. It's literally just started drafting it last week. So far, so good. It's lots of fun. And that will be coming to you from Harper Muse, and a different imprint of HarperCollins and William Morrow.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah,
Aimie,
it's a lot.
I mean, you're a full-time writer now. You're
Yes.
That's what you're doing. Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I am an adjunct for Drexel University. So, you know, I'm mentoring MFA students, which is great. But yeah, writing is definitely my full-time gig and a half for sure.
Yeah. Well, back to my question, what
Sure.
have you learned in the last 6 years or so, 6, 7 years? You obviously have learned how to be efficient and focused.
Yes. I mean, it's all about understanding your work ethic. And of course, we all have constraints. I am a mother of 2 children. Most of us have day jobs. I am fortunate enough that, you know, my other day job is parenting, which, you know, over the last 2 years took a lot of time because they were home a lot. As many parents can sympathize with, but certainly knowing your work style, when you're most efficient, and so you can prioritize your tasks. Like when I'm a little bit more tired and having my afternoon slump, I work on things that take less focus, like making graphics for marketing or things of that nature. So that's a big thing. And the importance of making connections with other authors, with publishers, with bookstores. Making friends with independent bookstore owners is hugely important if you have a traditional book deal, especially, and reaching out to those people, offering them signed book plates, and just being boots on the ground and not expecting, because, you know, my publisher is amazing and they have done so much outreach, but I think it is even more effective when I personally reach out to a contact to say, hey, would you like to do a virtual event? Or, hey, can I send you some book plates? And I've had a number of bookstores, for example, you know, just be absolutely, you know, they hadn't heard of my book, despite all the outreach, they hadn't heard of it. It might be a bookstore that the wonderful folks at William Morrow didn't know about or had overlooked. And, you know, getting it into one more bookstore is definitely worth the investment of time. And, you know, because those are relationships that you can take with you down the road, certainly.
Right. Wow. Okay. Across the Winding River, that one, when you look online, has, I think, some multiple thousands of ratings and reviews. It's way up there. I think.
Was it like somewhere between 14 or 19,000? I can't remember if it's 14 or 19.
And it's just seems like it's gotten the most attention of the books you put out. And do you understand why that is? Do you have an explanation for that?
I do, actually. I think that there is a very logical explanation, because it actually hasn't sold quite as many copies as Daughters of the Night Sky, but they've opened it up so that if you give a rating after you read the book on Kindle, it pops that into Goodreads and Amazon, as instead of you manually having to go, you have to write a review. Now they will just accept your ratings. And that was a difference between Girls on the Line and Across the Runyan River. So between book 4 and book 5, they changed that. And so you can just, at the end of when you read a book on a Kindle, if you click on a 5-star or 4-star, whatever star, even if you don't write a review, it puts that into your score on Amazon and Goodreads.
Gotcha. But still, that indicates a huge number of readers.
Yes, there are a lot of readers. It was part of the Amazon First Reads program, which is great for getting a book out there for sure. And I don't know the number. It may have been that it was hugely popular when it was getting in the free download phase of Amazon First Reads, maybe even more so than Daughters of the Night Sky. And that number just, you know, I don't know those numbers. Those numbers are kind of kept under wraps. And so it could be that it was hugely popular during that period. I can hope so. But it had a really nice response. And I'm really happy with how the book was received. And I think that I definitely grew because of that book. And it really helped with the School for German Brides, because the books definitely have, they're both set in Germany. They're both kind of on the fringe of the World War II fiction movement, because they're not dealing with the typical French resistance or English resistance movement that we see so much in World War II fiction, because of course that's the story of the good guys and we love reading about it, but this is kind of getting inside the brain of the beast, so to speak. And it's difficult to write about the bad guys, but I think it's important to understand them.
Yeah. Wow. So let me press you a little bit. You said you grew. What exactly does that mean?
I understood how my characters tick. I mean, I think with every book, the process gets easier. You learn a lesson, like with Across the Winding River, because it was a multiple narrative between 3 different protagonists. It was hard when I first started, it was so hard because one day I'd be writing from Max's point of view. The next day would be Johanna. The next day would be Beth. And I felt like I was losing an hour every day trying to get into their heads. And so I learned, like, maybe if I write 2 or 3 Max chapters in a row and then interweave them with Johanna and Beth, and because I use Scrivener, which is great for visually organizing. If I know what do I want to achieve in the next Beth chapter, make a couple notes in there, but then go on and write the Max chapter while I'm still in his voice. And that's something I took forward. Definitely in German Brides, I would write a few Hannah chapters, then Tilda, and back and forth. And then with Paris Bakery, I actually wrote the timelines completely separately. And we'll see how successful that is in the editing phase, because I think that, it's hard because I think that perhaps that it may be a bit more of a challenge to edit because I didn't write the storylines in concert with each other to understand how they flow. But, that's what editing is for. So,
yeah. Well, can you talk a little bit about why you left the Amazon world? What happened there?
Honestly, to be completely transparent, it's sales numbers. And I knew that because they have such high expectations for especially their Amazon first reads. I pitched them a Gilded Age book that actually became the novella that I just told you about. And they said, no, we don't think Gilded Age is going to do well, but they were happy to have it in an anthology with the more, kind of the draw of the World War I and World War II. And then they said no World War I, World War II from Aimie. And so I had the proposal ready for German Brides, but I proposed them the Paris Bakery book. And they said, your numbers just weren't quite high enough. We're going to have to pass. We pitched German Brides to William Morrow, and I got an offer from them an hour and a half after Lake Union let me go. Wow. So those 2 calls happened within 2 hours of each other. So it really wasn't a long time to be upset about Lake Union. But, I mean, honestly, it was such a positive experience working with them, and because they have really strong editorial. They bring in outside editors, and they're very meticulous because they know that there's somebody who they don't have the same reputation as the big 5 New York editor, publishing houses. So they have to work really, really hard to get the same level of respect. So they take editorial very seriously, which is great, because every editorial letter, and I can't stress this enough as advice for people who are getting to this stage of their career, you want those long editorial letters. It is a free MFA class right there. And so I welcome those 8 to 16 page single space editorial letters. And Tessa at William Morrow is amazing. And Kim Carlton at Harper Muse is amazing because they take it so seriously. But it was a totally positive experience. They got me in front of a lot of eyeballs, and those are hopefully readers I will be able to take with me over to William Morrow. And I know that the door is open if I ever want to go back there with a different type of project someday. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. But it's nice to be back at the trad publishing world too. Yeah. Because there are, it's just very different. It's very, very different in as far as how you market the book and the avenues that you pursue and the opportunities that are available to you.
Yep. Wow. And you say the call from William Morrow came in an hour and a half after
Mhm.
Lake Union let you go. Is that through an agent, or are you doing this all yourself?
Oh, through my agent. And
Yeah.
I am, yeah, and I've switched change agents since change agents. And I'm very fortunate to be working with the amazing Kevin Lyon of Marcel Lyon Agency, who is, one of the biggest names in historical fiction. And, it's just important to have the biggest and best advocate you have in your corner. And for all my RMFW peeps listening out there, it is better to have, you want to have a good agent. You don't just want any agent. And both of my agents have been wonderful. But, at some point you feel like, I just need somebody who knows the industry and knows those big publishing houses really, really well. And so that's why I switched. And it was a hard decision. It was a really hard decision. But for those of you who are out there agent shopping, be picky. Oh my goodness, be picky. And it is harder. Sometimes they say, the old wisdom is that it's harder to get an agent than it is to get a publishing deal. And in some respects, it's true, but it's so much better to have the right agent than a bad agent.
Yeah, but it is also understandable if you're a first time up and coming writer, if you get a
Yeah.
come on from an agent, and it's hard to decline that sort of opportunity.
Yeah, just do your research. Do your
Yeah.
research and make sure that their clients are happy and that they're advocating for you and not the publishing houses, because
Yeah.
that's their job. Yes, they have to protect their relationship with their publishing houses, especially houses that they do a lot of business with. But at the same time, you're their bread and butter. And the biggest thing is it's so hard because we've been conditioned to take the crumbs that fall off the table, but we're not the beggars at the feast. And yes, there are a lot of authors out there and there are a lot of content creators out there, but we have to recognize the value of what we're doing and the value of our craft and make sure that we're being compensated fairly for it and that we're getting the best shake possible at our publishing houses. And it's hard because, the more and more, the bigger publishing houses will get behind a few major titles every year because that can cover their losses for the rest of the year. And so much of it does fall to the author. And the trick is to just do what you can to work with your publishing house and to advocate for yourself and get them to do the things that they can, but be prepared to pull levers on your own because that's the reality of the job these days.
Yeah. Wow, you just sound like you've got such a full, rich writing life at this point. With
it's a lot.
One book coming out next week, 3 more next year. You obviously pay attention on the marketing front and on the hand-to-hand combat out there with bookstores and just doing that kind of reach out, and managing all these contracts and working with your agent, et cetera. Just give us a glimpse of, with 2 kids, and all that is involved with raising 2 children. What does your daily flow look like?
Well, I get the kids on the bus really early, at 7:10, as at 7:15 is when their bus shows up. So, and I'm thankfully kind of a morning person. So, I get them on the bus and I come back up and make breakfast. I have a full breakfast. I do not skimp on breakfast. I think it's super important for me as, very, eggs, big breakfast. And, I think that's important for me to get my blood flowing and to get the creative juices going. And then I like to draft new work first thing, while the muse is awake and not too cranky. And I will, try to get 1,000 words in if I can. But then, and what I do is I try to the night before kind of prioritize what needs to be done. So then after that, get 1,000 words done, or, I've hit my block of time. I will probably take a social media break and start posting things, and it's important to remember you've got to post about other people's work and social media, the most important thing, because you're only going to sell a few hundred copies through your own social media channels. It's all about getting on other people's social media channels. So be a good literary citizen and share about other people's launch days, share their good news. And reach out to be social media. And so I spend some time doing that in the later morning, have some lunch, maybe get out and go for a walk if time permits, because movement is so important. And then in the afternoon, I will work on editing and marketing. If I have to write articles for whatever publication, or if I need to do a blog post for somebody, that's when I will devote to that, and then editing and grading. And then after the kids, we have family time in the evening after the kids are home from school, dinner, all that good stuff. And then I get some more work done, usually in the evenings. I will finish up the really low energy tasks like making graphics for marketing, and sometimes that's when I get in my grading, though. A lot of time, like today, I spent my writing time grading because it was getting late. So it's just, it's all a balance. And then the last thing I try to do is prioritize for the next day and to block off chunks of time. And unless, obviously, and then we've got podcasts and things like that. So for the next 2 weeks, I probably won't get in a ton of writing time, but it's important to make sure that I know how to prioritize my day. Sometimes it's down to you're doing things by half-hour chunks. Other times it's just 2-hour blocks, and so it just depends on where you are in the crunch schedule. So next year is going to be a lot of crunch time and lots of minute scheduling. Right now is toward the summer. After German Brides winds down, it'll be more just kind of the loose blocking off of time.
Yep. Wow. Well, it sounds like you're very disciplined, but I think we already knew that.
Well, you have to be, because it's so easy, back in the before times when for the first time, there was a very brief window after my kids were both in school full time and before the pandemic where I had, that whole block of time and I didn't have an imminent release, and it was so easy to waste a whole day. It was so easy. And so you really have to think about what you really want to accomplish over the day. So I keep a running to-do list, and then I assign things to each day as they go along. And sometimes, it gets booted off. I couldn't get it done today. I'll do it tomorrow. Because as somebody who's kind of ruthlessly optimistic, I think I'm going to get way more done than I can.
Yeah. And you probably tell yourself, this is what you dreamed of. This is what you were after.
Yes, absolutely. This is, gosh, I wanted to be a writer from the time I was in third grade. And I never thought it was possible. You have a lot of adults, not my personal family, but teachers and things saying, oh, it's so hard to make a living as a writer. You're never going to be able to survive. You'll starve unless you marry well or you come from money. And neither of those things, I didn't come from money, and I have to work for a living. I am not independently wealthy by any stretch. But so I rely on my writing income, and it's what puts food on the table.
Yep.
But it's I think part of it is, the discipline really separates those who are going to be successful and those who don't, because you have to have the discipline to start a book, finish a book, and edit the heck out of a book. And then to go through all the trials and tribulations of submitting a book and securing an agent, securing a deal. And it takes a lot of fortitude. It takes a really thick skin. And, having spent 10 years as a public school educator, I have no discernible feelings left. So it's much easier for me because, they can't say anything that is going to hurt my feelings at this point, because I've been in the trenches, and I know how bad it can be. And, the worst day writing is still better than the best day doing a desk job, as far as I'm concerned. Yep. So,
Very good. Well, as we wrap up here, we always like to give our guests a chance to recommend a book by another writer or somebody out there. I know you read a fair amount in addition to all the work you do writing.
Look, so, if this were video, you could see I'm sitting in my library and I have surrounded.
It is a video.
But people are going to see it. Well, this is my library, and I have books surrounded by all my dear friends. And I like to think of them as like a literary hug these are mostly books by people I know and care about, and some classics too. But gosh, recently, I can't say one, but The Mozart Code by Rachel McMillan is amazing if you like a slow burn historical romance with a little bit of intrigue. Sorry, guys, my allergies are killing me. And then, of course, our own Heather Webb just released The Next Ship Home, which is gorgeous. I blurbed it. It's absolutely amazing. And for the big hitter books, my gosh, well, and Heather's, it was a big hitter book too, for sure. But The Diamond Eye by Kate Quinn was flawless. It was amazing. So those would be the 3 biggest books I can think of off the top of my head. And more things coming out. Like, I'm excited about the Emma Project by Sonali Dev next month. So lots of great books coming out. And oh my gosh, it's been a spring for books.
Yeah. Yep.
So
very good. Well,
All
and
right.
if you would, just as we wrap up here, I see a copy of the School for German Brides right behind you. You want to pull that up and let the camera take a
Yes,
closer look? Yeah.
absolutely. Here we go. This is the School for German Brides, a final copy. As you will see it in bookstores everywhere, Costco, Target, Walmart, it's going to be everywhere. So, and it's already out at a lot of Barnes and Noble. So check the tables at your Barnes and Noble, the racks at your local bookstores. And I really appreciate the support, and I love RMFW, and I am so grateful that you all had me on again.
Thanks a million, Aimie. We will catch up with you again down the road.
All right. Thank you so much.